Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to the Friuli Colli Orientali DOC in Italy, and we're looking at the iClivi 2020 Cabernet Franc. The story of iClivi begins in the mid-1990s when Mario Zanusso's father, Ferdinando, purchased two very old vineyards in the eastern part of Friuli-Venezia-Giulia around the village of Cormòns, choosing the path of the vine after 30 years of living and working in Africa. One of the vineyards, Galea, is located in the village of Corno di Rosazzo, which is in the Friuli Colli Orientali DOC, and the other vineyard, Brazzano, which is just a few kilometers away, is in the village of Brazzano di Cormòns, and this is actually in the Collio DOC. Now, it didn't take very long for Mario to fall in love with the beauty of the region, and then he made the decision to join his father, and together they built iClivi into what is now one of Friuli's great boutique wine estates, focusing on showcasing their unique terroirs in the finished wines. Today, Mario is farming around 12 hectares of vines, and these are predominantly white wine varieties native to Friuli, like Tocca Friulano, Ribole Gialla, Malvasia Istriana, Verduso Friulano, and a little pocket of Merlot. Now, when I asked him about the backstory of his Cabernet Franc, he shared with me that in recent years he wanted a little bit of a challenge and to expand his red wine range. And he was drawn to Cabernet Franc because of the variety's long history in the region, but also because of its finesse and spicy aromatics. He also shared with me that after finding the right vineyard, it took him a while to, and these are his own words, mature a personal take on Cabernet Franc. And the 2020 vintage is the inaugural bottling of iClivi's Cabernet Franc. So this wine is taking us to the Friuli Colli Orientali DOC, which is tucked up in the northeast corner of Friuli-Venezia-Giulia. And this is predominantly a white wine growing region, with the top three most planted varieties being Tocca Friulano, Pinot Grigio, and Sauvignon Blanc, which account for around 42% of the area under vine in the DOC. Cabernet Franc is the third most planted red variety after Merlot and Refosco, and there's about 102 hectares planted in the DOC area. Now, the region is located in the eastern part of the Udine province, and we're situated at a latitude of around 46.1 degrees north latitude, and that is very similar to northern Beaujolais in France, just to put that into perspective. The region begins in the north around the village of Tarcento and continues about 28 kilometers southeast to the village of Prepoto. And then the region actually takes a little bit of a dogleg southwest, about 10 kilometers to the villages of Butrio and Manzano. The region is bound to the northeast by the Julian Prealps, to the west by the Friulian Plain, and the Adriatic Sea is just 40 kilometers to the southeast. Now, the region has a gentle climate, and it is protected from the cold winds that would otherwise come in from the north and northeast thanks to those pre-Alps. There's warm air that comes in from the Friulian Plain, and then the breezes that come in from off the Adriatic Sea provide constant airflow and ventilation for the vineyards. During the growing season, the summertime daytime temperatures are warm, but they're not hot, and the evenings are cooled thanks to the cool air that descends down from the foothills. Now, the region does experience a relatively high amount of precipitation annually, about 1,500 millimeters on average annually, and about 700 to 950 millimeters falls during the growing season. Now, generally speaking, conditions will be a little bit cooler and wetter in the northern part of the region, as well as closer to the foothills of the Prealps, and then it'll be drier and warmer in the southern part of the region. Now, the vineyard area is actually quite narrow. It's only about 4 to 5 kilometers wide, and the vineyards follow the foothills of the Prealps, and they weave their way alternating with hills and valleys, intermingling with forests. So as a result, we have any number of exposures here: north, south, east, western exposures, and literally everything in between. Vineyard elevation ranges from around 100 to 350 meters above sea level. And in general, the vineyards are either planted on steeper terraced slopes or on slightly lower lying, gentler slopes. Now, in terms of soils, the region is actually defined by Fleisch, and this is known locally as ponca. And fleisch is alternating layers of marl, which is a type of calcareous clay, and sandstone. And fleisch is dense, it's brittle, it's got excellent drainage, and that is very good in this region because of the fact that we do experience a little bit higher rainfall here. Now, the impact and the presence of this fleisch varies widely throughout the region from site to site. And in general, on the flatter vineyards at the lower elevations, we'll find deeper soils, sandy, gravelly soils on top of the ponca. And then as we move up into the lower slopes, we find a slightly shallower topsoil with a bit more clay in the topsoil as well. And then as we move up further, we find thinner topsoils and a greater presence of marl on the steeper slopes on these terraced vineyards. Now, looking at this region as a whole, it's quite complex. And, if we look at all these factors, we're in, a region that is really better for white wine varieties. We have a lot of nuances in terms of microclimates, exposures, amount of precipitation that a specific spot receives, as well as we have different depths and textures of topsoils on top of the ponca. And all of that is to say that when it comes to Cabernet Franc, which is a very site-sensitive grape variety, site selection becomes very critical. Now, drilling down to where the vineyard is for today's wine, this vineyard is located in the village of Butrio, which is in the southwest portion of the region. And the vineyard is on a gentle slope here. It has a slight southeastern exposure, and we're at an elevation of around 100 meters above sea level. In terms of topsoil, there's about 1.5 meters of a clay topsoil over the ponca. And then in terms of the block of Cabernet Franc, it's about 1 hectare, and it was planted in 1970. And in my conversation with Mario, he shared with me that this vineyard was planted at a time in Friuli when there was a lot of care and attention paid to how vines were planted, in that choosing the ideal soil type, soil structure, and the ideal exposure for a variety, as opposed to planting something for the sake of, say, fashion or commercial potential. And he also shared that this is a pretty special site for Cabernet Franc, a bit of a Goldilocks spot, if you will. It's warm enough, but it's not too hot, but it's warm enough to consistently ripen the grapes every vintage. And also, because it's kind of in the lower portion of the hill, it actually has deeper topsoil here, and that's also very good for Cabernet Franc, particularly from moisture retention capacity. Cabernet Franc is not drought tolerant, so those deeper soils would be very helpful. Now, in terms of Mario's core tenets with regards to his wines, really comes down to focusing on lower yields and taking a low interventionist approach in the cellar. So when it comes to this wine, for the 2020 vintage, I should say, the yield from this block was around 5 tons per hectare. And then the fruit was hand harvested and it was destemmed. And then in terms of the cellar, the fermentation took place in cement vats with indigenous yeast. And this was a 55 hectoliter, if I recall from my notes, cement vat. And the maximum fermentation temperature hit about 25 degrees Celsius. The total time on skins was about 10 days, with some light pumping over during that time, twice daily. And then after pressing, the wine was then aged in cement as well for about 12 months before bottling. So let's dive into this wine. Okay, so what I immediately thought about when I was smelling this and making my notes earlier is that immediately when I put my nose in the glass, this smells different. And I mean that in like the best possible way. It smells like something from a place that I'm not familiar with. It has some character, and I really, really appreciate that. So the nose leads with spice, and it leads with kind of tiny, crunchy red fruits. Things like red currant, lingonberry. There's a little bit of a sour cherry thing going on. And then there's just this wonderful aromatic perfume of spices like black and white pepper. There's a little bit of a chili flake thing going on. There's a touch of juniper here as well. Then there's some really lovely herbal elements in the wine, like rosemary, a touch of mint. There's a little bit of like a little bit of a evergreen tree thing happening, which I made in my notes. I said fir trees, or even like cypress perhaps. There's a gorgeous peony, like spicy peony perfume as well. Yeah, the nose has a beautiful translucency. It's very exotic. It has a lovely perfume. It's kind of heady in that way, like the perfume kind of tickles your kind of upper senses there. On the palate, those same kind of tiny little red fruits come through on the palate really nicely, but actually the fruit profile on the palate means a touch sweeter, which is really lovely. Like there's a little bit of like a wild strawberry note on the palate. And then I'm getting a little bit more of that spice as well on the palate. A bit more anise seed as well comes through on the palate, which is really lovely. Now the wine leans definitely more on the savory side, which I absolutely love. And I do love the balance of the fruit, the spice, and the kind of herbal character in the wine. The acidity is zippy, it's kind of crunchy, it's very exuberant. The tannins are quite fine, almost reminiscent in texture of like a fine linen. There's a nice tight weave to the tannins. There's a firmness to the tannins on the finish as well, which I really like. Yeah, there's just such a beautiful presence to the wine. It is immensely drinkable. It's super balanced. It has this wonderful, gosh, it's got a beautiful finesse, a gracefulness to it as well. It's really lovely. Yeah, the middle palate of this wine is absolutely outstanding. It has this gorgeous, almost like strawberry black pepper compote thing on the middle palate, if that makes any sense to anybody. But strawberry and black pepper is kind of a bit of a off the wall combination, but it is kind of common, like you see it in more gastronomic restaurants, is the combination of strawberry and black pepper. And I am getting like this strawberry black pepper compote thing kind of in the middle palate, which I really, really dig. And overall, the presence of this wine, it's got medium body, great acidity, lots of lift, lots of fragrance, lots of perfume. Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's really complete. It's got lots of personality, and it just feels really honest. And I'm really into it. I don't get a chance to taste a lot of Cabernet Franc from Friuli, and I am excited by the potential for Cabernet Franc in this region. And examples like this make me want to like jump on an airplane and head to Friuli and try more. And I've got to say, I really appreciate Mario's story with regards to Cabernet Franc and how thoughtful he came about his work with Cabernet Franc and taking the time to kind of find the right site, work with the right grower, like kind of follow his heart in a way and treat the variety in a way that really spoke to him and what he believes the grape can do. And this is undeniably Cabernet Franc, and it's coming, and I can sense that it's coming from someplace different, someplace unique, someplace that has a lot of character to it. And it's one that I look forward to hopefully tasting more of across future vintages, and I think it's a really outstanding first attempt at Cabernet Franc for Mario and his team at iClivi. So if you've had this wine before, do let me know what you thought of it in the comments below, or if you happen to have another favorite Cabernet Franc from the Friuli Colli Orientali DOC or somewhere else perhaps in Northeast Italy. Do let me know what that wine is in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.